were actually sentenced to be executed. And 4 of them actually were. The 5th, a guy by the name of Louis Ling, bit into a dynamite cap the night before the execution and blew his own head off. The next morning, the newspaper reporters who went to watch the other 4 guys get hanged actually said that they were hearing the ghost of Louis Ling moaning and wailing around the scaffold area. This would have been that same prison where the fire station is now that I pointed out at the beginning of the tour. There were a lot of stories about that being haunted back in the day. It's something we notice a lot is sometimes you can tear down the building and the ghosts go away, but really more often it doesn't seem to be the case. A lot of times they just kind of carry over into the next building. And I don't know if all of them carried over there. There were a ton of stories about that prison being haunted. There's just a couple about the fire station, but there are a couple. The one guy that we can still call by name who's haunting that place is a guy called Carl Wanderer. What happened with Carl Wanderer is in 1920 he walked into a bar and came up to a drifter who was sitting in the back. I said, "Hey buddy, you gotta help me out, see? I'm in the doghouse with my wife. She's about to have a baby, but she doesn't think I'm good enough to be a dad. So here's what I'm thinking. If you'll come pretend to mug us tomorrow so I can punch you in the face and look like a hero, I'll give you $10. So the drifter agreed to the deal. Wanderer loaned him a pistol to make it look more authentic. The next day he was walking home from the movies with his wife, and his drifter jumped out from behind the bushes and said, "Alright, give me all your money." So Wanderer pulled out a gun of his own and shot the drifter to death. Then he turned to the side and shot his pregnant wife to death, too. That had been his plan the entire time. He didn't want to be a dad, he wanted to get back into the army or something. So he came up with this insane plan to kill his wife and blame the whole thing on a drifter who would be too dead to argue. And for a couple of days, the newspapers treated him like he was a real hero, but I don't think the cops ever quite believed him. And after just a couple of days, they got him to confess. Now, eventually, of course, they sentenced him to hang. And another way that we differ from other places back then is that places with good hangmen, a good hangman like to do things with a very bare minimum ceremony. A really good one will just walk up to a guy, say, "Come with me, sir," spin him around a couple of times and drop him. They can have him from end to cell to dead at the end of the rope in 30 seconds or less. The record is under 15 seconds. In Chicago, they like to do things with a lot of ceremony. They'd have a grim ritual march from what they called the death cell out to the scaffold. Then once you were on the scaffold, you had to stand up there and look out over the crowd of all of the reporters, the doctors, and everybody. And then once you were out there, they expected you to make a speech about how nice the warden had been, and how sorry you were, and where the bodies could be found if applicable. When Wanderer wouldn't do any of that stuff, as near as I can tell, he decided to torture them a bit instead. So they brought him out and asked him if he would make a speech. All he would do was sing one of those depressing 1920s parlor songs that was popular back then. But if you hear my prayer away off my old pal, why don't you answer me? That kind of stuff. So those were his last words, and that's actually the ghost, too. People actually say that on cold mornings they've actually heard Carl Wanderer out there singing that song. And I'm kind of inclined to believe him just because if they hadn't actually heard it, I have no idea how they would know how that song goes. Now, unless they were really into barbershop quartet music or something. Now and then I have into barbershop music to know that one. Incidentally, if you ever want to kill an entire afternoon, go on Google and type in competition barbershop. These guys are insane. It's like Lee for middle-aged men. All of the drama and even more mustaches.
Yeah.
Alright, now just a few years ago I could have taken you guys around here and it would have been the scariest stop on the tour, but not because of anything to do with ghosts. The neighborhood was just that bad. Crime, corruption, gambling, sin, vice, drugs, prostitution, all these things ran rampant around here, and that was just down at the police station. In the middle of this, the entire time this was a bad neighborhood, the whole 125 years, stood this old mansion called Hull House. This place was built in the 1850s by a guy called Charles Hull, and he was kind of an interesting cat himself. When he was 12 years old, he owned a tavern in New York. When he was 14, he renounced alcohol forever, tore the place down, taught himself to read, and became a lawyer. Eventually, he moved